Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clack, columnist, editorial board.
Nancy Prayer-Johnson, associate editorial board editor.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
This is our election recap edition of Puro Politics. We're fighting off sleep deprivation. I know at least some of us are. And
we're losing.
We're losing. Yeah. We're like Lauren Boebert in there, just kind of trying to kind of pull it off.
Sleep is the Republican Party in Texas and we're the Democratic Party.
So much to talk about. But before we get into it, I wanted to begin with what is probably the biggest story to hit San Antonio City Council in a long time, an investigation into Northeast Side Councilman Clayton Perry, an incident involving him, an apparent hit and run. And Greg, you've written about it. I know you've been editing stuff on it.
I jumped into the reporting on it early yesterday morning. What happened was just after 9 o'clock on Sunday night, at the intersection of Redland and Jones-Maltzberger roads, a black Jeep took a really wide turn and hit a Honda Civic head-on, doing major damage. The driver of the Jeep then drove away, and we know that as a hit and run. But somebody on the scene followed the Jeep, got the address, returned to the scene, gave it to the driver, who then handed it on to the cops. Turns out the house is Clayton Perry's house. The Jeep was in the driveway with the engine still on, door open. The cop knocks at the door. No answer. He's leaving, and here's some moaning in the backyard. He goes to the backyard. He finds Clayton Perry with a laceration on his head, and he's kind of very unsteady on his feet, smelling of alcohol. And so we have a hit and run investigation. It doesn't appear that the police are going to be pursuing DUI charges just because
no sobriety test, right?
Right. Yeah. There was no sobriety test, and it's you're going to have to link his having been drinking at the time of the accident to where they found him in the backyard. So this broke Monday night. We confirmed the story. It was on KSAT. We confirmed the story early Tuesday morning. And by noon, Mayor Ron Nirenberg was calling for Perry to step down if the reports are shown to be accurate. So we're kind of in this holding pattern now, waiting on SAPD, some word from either the department or from City Manager Eric Walsh. I should say, by the way, so Clayton Perry represents District 10 on the Northeast side. He's known as the only real...
He's my councilman, actually.
Yeah. Oh, he's the only kind of fiscal conservative on council. But he's very, he's not dogmatic. He's a very friendly guy. His kind of public persona is a little goofy. He's
likes hats.
Yeah, likes hats. He's got this weird thing for hats and sunglasses. Friendly, kind of open. He's very approachable. He's well liked on council.
He's a retired Air Force civil engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
He was a civil engineer in the Air Force.
He was in the IE band, I think, in the 70s. I remember.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was. Yeah, it was the Corps cadets. We're waiting to see what happens. The rumors were just running wild through City Hall yesterday.
He hasn't said anything at all.
No, he's not. He didn't return our phone call. And, with him kind of hunkered down, we're waiting to see if he's going to show up at the City Council B session today. Just, is he going to be at the meeting tomorrow, which will be interesting because it's the censure vote on District 1 council member Mario Bravo, who is, of course, accused of verbally assaulting District 7 Councilwoman Anna Sandoval, with whom he had a romantic relationship. That would be super awkward, I think, for Clayton Perry. And we're hearing there's a chance he doesn't show up either at the meeting today or at session tomorrow. Now, the question is, when Nirenberg called on his resignation, if all of this is kind of borne out, does he know something? Like, has there been any kind of communication between him and Perry? I've heard that's unlikely, but it could be. And is a resignation in the works? We heard yesterday that, he's definitely going to resign today. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
We also heard that, the council was going to try to add him to the censure list. But that didn't really make sense because there's no investigation yet. Like they haven't completed it.
It's just premature.
Right.
And you, as you said, the question of whether he was intoxicated or not is not really a legal issue at this point.
Right.
But it's in the fact that he smelled of alcohol was in the report, and it's a political issue. Absolutely. And I think that he should be given the presumption of innocence, certainly, but that report, it does not look good, and it
looks pretty terrible.
It looks pretty terrible, and I just don't see how you can continue.
And one question is, was this case handled as it would have been for anybody? Like, were there any differences in the police's approach to Clayton Perry as there would have been for just, kind of the average citizen? We're still kind of sussing that out right now.
I'm kind of fascinated with the person who observed this and said, I'm going to follow that person.
Right.
That's what I keep thinking.
The average person wouldn't necessarily do that. And I thought that was pretty remarkable.
I mean, it must have been some scene to watch that and for that person to feel the obligation to go and follow him and to do that, because they don't know who's in that Jeep. They don't know what if they're armed, especially in Texas.
Right.
And they don't know what's going to happen, but they did that and they, went into investigative mode. And I think that's a really big deal. But that's what I think of first with that. And I mean, obviously it's unethical. It's bad optics. It's, it's a big problem for him, and it's unfortunate.
He could have, he could have killed someone. He could have killed himself, but he could have killed somebody. Yeah. And what was the reason again, Greg, for the officer not doing a breathalyzer? Or
that's unclear. I mean, for one thing, it's unclear. Let me just say that.
Well, he denied that he was the driver.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. So the officer questioned him at the scene in his backyard. And he said he either refused to answer, or when he did answer, he gave vague answers. But he did say, I wasn't driving tonight. So I think the officer, and like I said, it's the real reason is we don't know yet. It's unclear. But you can look at the situation and say, okay, well, you have this guy who's in the backyard. He is injured. He's been drinking, but you can't directly connect him. You didn't witness him driving. And it's, is that a good reason to not give a field sobriety test? I don't know. It seems,
I think legally,
that seems questionable to me.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know exactly, but I don't think legally they can give a field sobriety test unless they see that he was actually driving. They have to witness it.
Okay.
And because he could easily say, my wife was driving or my friend was driving, or, he could easily say that. Yeah. His lawyers would say that. You can't prove it. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's what kind of saved him there, was just that little bit of time. If that is the case, if he was the one driving. Yeah. It looks that way, right? He was laying, he was injured. But he could also have been injured in the accident, even if someone else was driving and lay out there. You just, you don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
But I want to shift to the election, and I'm going to kind of break it up into three parts, because I think there were really three stories. If you're in San Antonio, there were really three stories to last night's election. In Bexar County, Democrats dominated. If we look statewide at Texas, it was a really strong night for Republicans, and they maintained the control that they've had basically for nearly 3 decades now. And nationally, I think it was a night of disappointment, a kind of a squandered opportunity for Republicans who, if you look at history and the poll numbers for Joe Biden and the inflation rate, you would have thought this is going to be a huge wave election for Republicans. And it'll be a while before we have the final numbers when it comes to Congress, but clearly that did not happen. So we'll start with Bexar County. I think the big news was that Democratic candidate Peter Sakai handily defeated Republican nominee Trish DeBerry, and by a somewhat smaller margin, but still very comfortably. You saw Joe Gonzalez beat Mark LaHood for district attorney. Carrie, when you look at those races, I'll preface this by saying I was at a Republican precinct chair event about 6 months ago when Greg Breckhouse, who was managing Trish DeBerry's campaign, said this is going to be a historic election in Bexar County. We're going to take the county judge race. Mark LaHood's going to win. I've been talking to the governor's people. They think they can carry Bexar County. Greg Abbott had a great night, but did not come anywhere close to taking Bexar County. So a lot of hope on the Republican side in Bexar County that didn't pan out.
And another prediction that didn't work out for Mayor Brockhouse. We had editorial board. We had a podcast last night with Judge Wolf and then later Joaquin, and the judge was saying that he doesn't see when Bexar County ever goes Republican again because the party has moved, and it's predictable because we always know that regardless of what's going to happen on the national scene, we're going to have these waves. And it was interesting in our editorial candidate endorsement meetings with the judicial candidates, even amongst the Republican candidates, some incumbents, there was this sense of what was going to happen, and that's where it's sadder because we lose a lot of great judges every 2 or 4 years because of the party they belong to. But other than that, I mean, that's not that surprising what happened last night in Bexar County.
Yeah, the judges' race were really interesting because of how common the margins were.
It's almost like still that straight ticket voting.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, so straight ticket voting is no longer allowed, but voters are straight ticket balloting.
That's right. I mean, you could see a lot of
defensiveness among Democratic voters. I mean, they just they went down the list. They don't know. Most people do not know who their judges are.
Right.
And so they're just voting Democrat. And you see like 56, 57, 58%, victories. And it was very, very consistent throughout the bench.
But yeah, like the Democrats cleaned house judicially.
Yeah. I mean, yesterday.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with a Democratic political operative early this year when the threat of a red wave, I think, was stronger. And that person said, because in 2014, as blue as Bexar County has been for a while, in 2014, you had a Republican wave election and Democrats were swept out of the courthouse. And there was a fear that among Democrats that was going to happen again. And, the opposite happened. The lone Republican successes in Bexar County were in pockets of Bexar County. You had Grant Moody winning. It was a pretty competitive race over Susan Corbell for Precinct 3 County Commissioner. And John Lujan held on to, I've always called him the king of special elections because he's been twice elected to Texas House in special elections, but never served during a legislative session. He's one of those kind of oddities in Texas politics. But now he's going to because he won a close race over Frank Ramirez. So there are pockets of success, but countywide, Democrats control things. Statewide, completely different story. Democrats had hope that Beto O'Rourke would, could pull off an upset in the governor's race, or that Mike Collier might do that over Dan Patrick for lieutenant governor. And what we saw was Republican statewide winning, I think, by double digits in almost every race, if not every race. Greg, when you look at Greg Abbott, I mean, it was. He had some tough questions to deal with. I mean, there were a lot of people still upset about the grid failure in 2021, his failure to act or refusal to act on gun safety after Uvalde. But he did really well.
Greg Abbott has, for a long time now, and certainly in this election cycle, shown himself to be a master of changing the subject. Right. I mean, it became all about border enforcement, border security, busing, immigrants who cross into Texas to New York and Chicago. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, part of it was that. And part of it is, this is still, when you get out into the hinterlands, I mean, it is still an extremely conservative state. It is a Republican stronghold, and it will be for years to come.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I always tell myself that this has always been a conservative state. It was a conservative Democratic state for ages. And then when we had a political realignment during the the Reagan Revolution, it became a conservative Republican state. And we're seeing demographic changes. We're seeing population growth, but it's still a conservative state, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
I mean, and also another thing that's not going to change anytime soon is kind of the divide between urban counties and rural counties. Like it's only going to sharpen, and I think you saw that continuing last night. Harris, Dallas, El Paso, Bexar County. I mean, they broke for Abbott in big ways.
And Nancy, we know. I mean, that Beto O'Rourke, if his failures in rural counties, I mean, it wasn't for lack of trying. We know he went into these places and was willing to talk to people who he knew would be who were unlikely to vote for him. I mean, what if anything do you think Democrats could do in those counties?
I think I think there was just some missed opportunities, and actually talking last night on the live stream with Judge Wolf, that opened my eyes too to the issue of it's just not resonating with rural voters. So yes, he talked with them, they listened. I mean, what I saw in the rallies, the ones that I was able to watch, the streams of and things, was that the people were listening for the most part, but it just wasn't resonating with them to a deep enough level that they would vote for him. So it just didn't work out that way, obviously, right? But what Judge Wolf said last night is that it's not resonating with them because he's not talking to the issues that are important to them. So the Democrats need to talk more about inflation, about crime, about immigration, right? And not only talk about it, but make changes that rural residents of Texas will feel like they are being taken care of, that their issues, that their policies that they want to get seen are actually being done. And that would take a Democratic Party to totally go out of the box, right? And totally try to come more to the center because it's too far. And I think that's what Texas said in a big way last night. That these are the issues that are most important. It wasn't abortion. It wasn't gun legislation, safety. Last night after our live stream, and, we stayed here late last night, and I wrote about the Uvalde reaction in a column, right? And so that'll be in Thursday's paper. But, people in Uvalde, they were very disappointed. Right. The people who are most, who are loudest on Twitter and things like that. And so these are the people who lost children in the Uvalde school shooting. They were extremely disappointed. And, you see on Twitter today, the trending is WTF Texas.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of that.
So that says a lot, right? But of course, Twitter is a lot of liberals, right? Leans Democratic and liberal. And so, I think that it just needs to be, it needs to come more to the center. The Democratic Party does need to look at these issues, not only talk about them, but, create policies around that as well, and just come a little more to the center, because if not, we're just never going to be able to make any kind of change. And it will be, we have an editorial for Thursday's paper. It's online now, but it will continue to be status quo elections in Texas. You will continue with Republicans and GOP leadership because they're not getting, because these voters in a very conservative state are not hearing what they want to hear.
Yeah. Beto O'Rourke, he's lost 3 elections in 4 years, one for the U.S. Senate, where he ran for president in 2020, and then and now has lost for governor. And but I think he was unique in his ability to energize young voters, certainly unique in his ability to fundraise. I don't know there's another Democrat on the scene in Texas who has the skill set that he has, although, some would say, well, maybe there's a certain baggage that he has also that maybe held him back. But I wonder, Carrie, I mean, when it really felt to me like last night Beto O'Rourke was essentially saying, that's it for me. Now he's going to be politically engaged, but as a candidate, that's probably going to be it for him, I think. I'm curious to see what you think. But if he doesn't run again, who's going to pick up that baton?
Someone I know who knows him and who pretty well, and was talking to him a lot, a year ago as he was deciding this. Was saying that one of the biggest thing that was keeping him from doing this, because he didn't want to be seen as a 3-time loser.
Sure.
And mess up whatever chances he had for 2024. And And I understand that. And I also see where it's hard to see where he could turn around in 2024 and do this again.
Yeah.
But he ran as good a campaign as any Democrat could have done. No other Democrat, no one else in the state could have rallied people and given people a sense that maybe this was possible, that he could win. The double digits losses on all going down is stunning.
Yeah.
And he's 50 years. Two things. First of all, he's 50 years old. I can see a scenario where I think he's gonna be around, not necessarily running for elective office, but his organization, which was very active during the power outage and in voting. I mean, he's going to be a presence in Texas national politics for the rest of his life, whether or not he ever runs for public office again. But you can also see a scenario where, who knows, maybe when he's 75 years old and Texas finally turns blue, this is my time. Yeah, it's my time. You can see it.
Been waiting this thing out.
75.
But as for who else who is out there right now,
Yeah.
my scenario, and it's a year ago, I had envisioned a case where if Beto didn't win, the person who would be best placed to be the Democratic nominee for governor in 2026 would be Nina Hidalgo.
Yeah.
Harris County. Now she did win re-election. It narrowly, but
that actually was a really big win for Democrats because it was tough, very tough.
And there's some ethical issues, and so that may sully things right now. But at this point, as we're setting the day after this election, who else is? I mean, there's always this is Joaquin and Julian.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't see this. I don't see this changing anytime soon because part of the problem is not just Democrats and their messaging and moving to the middle. It's the fact that you have the Republican Party in Texas, which is so far to the right, where there's no room for Joe Strauss and Al Lawson.
In Beto's speech last night, and I didn't watch it live. I watched it. It was probably 1 a.m, 2 a.m. when I watched it on his Facebook feed. But he didn't sound to me like he was going to stop. Like this was the end. To me, his message was one of progress. And, he talked about, the people that did vote for him and just like what a big deal it was. So he really focused on that. And of course, thanked everybody in his campaign and everyone who supported him. But I just didn't hear that. I didn't get it. Now, granted, it was late and I'm tired. I still am. But I didn't hear that tone from him. I heard more of a let's keep fighting kind of tone in some way. That's what it led me to believe. I mean, if you look at it, 3.5 million voters in Texas voted for him. And that's a huge deal in Texas. And, I think that says a lot, his tone and the fact that 3.5, and I know it wasn't 4.4 million voters like Abbott had, but, 3.5 people in Texas did vote for him. I am curious to see the demographics, of it, did the young voters come out? I mean, we saw video feeds on Twitter and we saw, people at UT Austin and San Marcos, and we saw all of his rallies and we saw that, people online were saying that they were voting and these were young people. So that kind of gives me hope, no matter what the results are, it gives me hope that at least young people are understanding the importance of getting out there and voting. One thing that occurs to me is that we've seen this in cycle after cycle where Democrats are kind of scrambling to have a candidate for governor. We'll be in summer of 2013, maybe even a little later, and there's no real solid prospect because it's a daunting thing to enter the race. And if Beto O'Rourke had not run this time, I don't know who they would have had as an option. And one thought I had is that if fellow Democrats who maybe would have the ability to run a strong campaign look at this and think, this is someone who raised about $70 million or so. And this is someone who tirelessly went across the state and took his message to everybody and had a lot of name recognition and got a lot of, enthusiasm and got a lot of media attention.
and still lost by what 10, 11, 12 points.
I mean, he can't win it. Yeah.
Is this worth me even thinking about? And so I think that one of the things that I think will come out of this is not only that Republicans still, cemented their control of the state, but also I think that it's got to be discouraging to future Democrats. If in 4 years you're going to think, do I want to put myself through that?
I would have to think that there are some Democrats in Texas who, although mourning the loss of Beto O'Rourke in this race, they have to be looking at him and saying, "Look, this is a guy who, I mean, he connects with his supporters in a way most candidates don't. He's great at fundraising, and he's willing to go into rural communities and hang out there." Was the reception he got great? No. But I mean, Democrats have largely ignored these communities for a long time, just as far as, what issues they emphasize. I have to think that there's some Democrats who want him to help with party building, like to go around the state,
he'd be good at
identifying, candidates for city council or school board races or state reps races, just get it, bring them along, help groom them.
Yeah.
Although grooming, I don't think we.
We can't say that. We can't say that anymore.
Molding 2 years ago, that would have been fine. Molding, that's it.
And helping him with fundraising and kind of building up at the grassroots. And he'd be great at that.
He would be great at that.
And he was that unique. I mean, he's a unique figure. I mean, historically, in many ways. I mean, I said before, he's a phenomenon. Phenomenon can be good or bad, but it's something you can't explain. Right. You don't see coming. And there's really not anyone, other than an Obama who we've seen with this kind of who connects with people. But he was he's that rare candidate who the reason he ran against, I think, really what was his own instincts and maybe long-term interests was because the people wanted him to run. And there was, and I don't see any other candidate out there who you're going to be seeing this outcry for in any races soon. Yeah.
So I want to wrap things up by talking about what happened nationally. And I'm going to set this up by looking a little bit at the history of midterm elections. And, you all, during your live stream last night, had a great conversation with Congressman Joaquin Castro. And he talked about the fact that a lot of voting is really oppositional. People they're upset. I mean, I'm not saying that there haven't been periods in time when the U.S. voters as a group have been content. There have been periods of contentment, but I mean generally I think people for different reasons at different times they're frustrated, they're anxious, and they tend to take it out on the president's party during midterm elections. That's just the history. We could go back to Reconstruction, and it's amazing how deep this phenomenon is, but if you just look at the last 85 years, because post Franklin Roosevelt, 1934, when he was so popular, the New Deal went over so well with the public that he had a very good midterm. After that, there have been two midterm elections when the president's party has done well. You had 1998 when Republicans overstepped on impeachment with Bill Clinton and Democrats won a few seats. 2002, Republicans, you had a Republican president, George W. Bush. The country rallied behind him after 9/11, and he had a good midterm. There was a close one in 1962 coming off the Cuban Missile Crisis. Weeks later, there was a midterm election, and because of that and the public support for John Kennedy, Democrats just lost, I think, 4 seats in the House. Almost every other one has just been a wipeout. And I mean, this was amazing. I didn't know this till recently when I was looking at some of these things. Dwight Eisenhower, who was, I think, pretty much a beloved figure during his presidency and before. In 1958, Republicans lost 48 seats in the House, 13 in the Senate during the Dwight Eisenhower's last midterm. We know Bill Clinton, during his first midterm, Democrats lost, I think it was 54 seats, and Republicans took control of the House for the first time in 40 years. Obama, we had the Tea Party election in 2010. The Democrats lost 63 seats. This happens all the time. Trump, in 2018, Republicans lost 40 seats. It was the worst midterm for them since Watergate. This is what happens all the time. And Joe Biden there's a lot. I think history will probably be kinder to him than maybe the voters are now. As far as if you look at what's been achieved if you look at legislation that's passed, but he's not a popular president. Inflation is high, and this had all the makings of just a huge wave election. And right now, as we're talking, it's still not clear if Republicans, who were close to having a majority as we came into this election, it's still not completely clear that they're going to take the House. It's likely they will, but it'll be very thin. The Senate is still up for grabs. I think the last I heard, there were of the 32 governor races that we had on the ballot, 16 went to Republicans, 16 went to Democrats. They're just amazing. In Michigan, you had Hillary Scholten win, the first Democrat to win in Grand Rapids in that congressional district since 1977. You had John Fetterman, who was recovering from a stroke, defeated the Donald Trump handpicked candidate, Dr. Oz, in Pennsylvania, flipped that Senate seat. What happened? Clearly, this was not what Republicans, they're going to try to put the best face on it, but this is not what they had anticipated.
I mean,
what happened?
There was such a cockiness that they were, and it came somewhat close, that they were talking about winning, the governorship in New York. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Democrats did have a bad night, where they had a bad night, was in New York.
Those congressional
including
races.
Sean Patrick Maloney, the chairman.
That's right. Yeah, that was interesting.
But I think what happened was that voters were paying attention. They were paying attention to the insurrection, to the hearings. They were paying attention to the election deniers, and they were paying attention, maybe finally comprehending Trump. And I think people paused, took a breath, and said, we don't want. I mean, all of us were talking about democracy being on the ballot. And so there's a reason why this morning, and not just among Democrats, but among many Republicans, never Trumpsters, and independents, there's a sigh of relief this morning at what could have been. And so the ironic thing about Biden and his poll numbers is that the biggest winner last night was Joe Biden.
Yeah. And, I've felt for a while that Donald Trump, on the one hand, is an amazing political phenomenon. If you look at the idea of a reality show host, getting elected president, and taking command of his party in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime. So in that sense, he's amazing. On the other hand, he's somewhat of a political failure. I mean, he ran for president. His greatest night in 2016, he defeated the most unpopular Democratic nominee in the history of presidential polling, and still lost the popular vote by 3 million. Though he threaded the needle in the Electoral College. 2018 had a terrible midterm, and it was clearly a referendum on him. 2020, he loses the popular vote by 7 million, gets voted out of office. That doesn't happen often for incumbent presidents. And then last night, if the referendum had been on Joe Biden, it probably would have been a much better night for Republicans. But Trump, by recruiting and getting behind, election deniers and some really just...
He also lost the Senate for them in 2020.
That's right. I'm glad you mentioned that. So, some of these candidates, if you look at, election deniers, I think the congressional race I mentioned, Scholten. She beat John Gibbs, who was an election denier, and there were in Michigan and Arizona, you had Secretary of State elections where you had election deniers on the Republican side, and Democrats won because voters had to look at that and thought, I'm worried about the election process.
Right. Yeah. So
I think that Republicans are starting to realize that every time that it's a referendum on Trump.
That's why Trump was the biggest loser last night. And DeSantis is the second biggest winner.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. I would say the biggest winner.
among Republicans.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This was you're right. Like it was somewhat of a referendum on Trump, and DeSantis in Florida anyway killed it. So he's got stature that he didn't have on Monday.
Yeah.
I think he's well positioned going into 2024, assuming he starts kind of testing the presidential waters.
Yeah, but this is what happens though. Ron DeSantis you're the biggest winner among Republicans in the 2022 elections. What do you win? You're going to be incinerated by Trump, right? Because it's already started. It's going to be so dirty and nasty.
And the thing that I think sometimes those of us who, in the media, I think maybe just people who in the general public maybe don't even who are not involved in the Republican Party don't understand that there is some complexity of opinion about Trump, I think, within the party. There are people who maybe thought his economic policies were good and the tax cut was good when he was president, liked certain things that he did. They liked his, his nationalistic sort of trade approach. But they're thinking like he's kind of an embarrassment now, or he's gone too far with this election stuff, or he's, there is, these things are not expressed publicly that much, I don't think, because people fear him in the party. But I think there is some, there's complexity there. I think that was reflected somewhat in what we saw.
I think so too. I think, we can't have Trump again. We can't have a Trump presidency, and just the thought of it, I think makes people anxious, right? And I see, people are disappointed. And I feel like it should hopefully fuel that. I don't know, DeSantis will be much better though. I mean, I don't know. I heard on a talk show this morning something about maybe DeSantis will be run for vice president under Trump. I'm like,
that same thing.
Just the thought of it made me stress out.
The only good thing about that is it would never happen.
It would, no. Can you imagine?
Yeah, Trump could not have somebody seen as competent and able to step into his role easily. So
my thought has been that Carrie Lake, if she got elected governor of Arizona, would be the ideal Trump running mate. She's extremely loyal to him. She's very comfortable on TV. As we're doing this, and we still don't know if she's gonna pull out that Arizona governor's race. It's very close, and that's another one that even if she wins, it should not have been that close. I mean, Katie Hobbs does not have the TV skills, the political skills of Carrie Lake. She refused to debate her, and still is hanging in there with a chance to win. So that says a lot about the night that Republicans had. We're going to have a lot of political stuff to cover in the next few weeks, and we appreciate you listening and hope you all are doing well. Take care.